The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor, a sound that sliced through the polite chatter of the Hawthorne Charity Gala. All eyes turned. There in the center of it all stood a 7-month pregnant Isabel Hawthorne. Her simple dress a stark contrast to the glittering gowns around her. Her husband Nathaniel wouldn't look at her. Instead, his mother, the formidable Genevieve Hawthorne, pointed a diamond-laden finger. "You are a disgrace," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "A gold-digging fraud who tried to pass off another man's child as a Hawthorne." Thrown out into the cold night with nothing but a small suitcase, Isabel's world ended. But what none of them knew, what the entire city would soon discover, is that they hadn't just thrown out a penniless wife. They had just disowned the woman who owned them all. Stay with us to witness the most shocking reversal of fortune you will ever hear. The Hawthorne mansion was less a home and more a monument to dynastic wealth. Perched atop the highest hill in the exclusive enclave of Sterling Heights, its grand Palladian windows looked down on the city. With the same disdainful superiority as its matriarch, Genevieve Hawthorne. For Isabel, who had grown up in a small suburban town with a loving but modest family, marrying into the Hawthorne dynasty had been like stepping into a fairy tale. A dark, twisted fairy tale, as she was quickly learning. Her husband, Nathaniel Hawthorne Jr., had been everything she thought she wanted. He was devastatingly handsome, with a Cambridge education and a charm that could disarm world leaders. When he'd met Isabel, a bright-eyed junior art curator, he'd claimed to be enchanted by her authenticity, her refreshing lack of artifice. He'd pursued her relentlessly, showering her with affection and promises of a life she could barely imagine. Her parents, bless their hearts, had been wary. People like that, Izzy. Her father had warned gently, "They don't marry people like us. Be careful." But Isabel had been in love, and Nathaniel had been convincing. The wedding was a society event, featured in magazines that Isabel had only ever flipped through at a newsstand. But the moment the vows were exchanged, the gilded cage began to close. Genevieve, who had been coolly polite during the courtship, became openly hostile. She criticized Isabel's clothes, her manners, her choice of friends, and most of all, her unsuitable lineage. The Hawthorne name has been synonymous with power and integrity. For a century, Genevieve would often say at dinner, her gaze fixed on Isabel. It is not a trinket to be acquired by a pretty face with no background. Nathaniel, who had once been her champion, became her warden. He would placate her in private, but publicly side with his mother. "Just try to fit in, darling," he'd whisper. "It's how things are done." The announcement of Isabel's pregnancy had briefly seemed like a truce. Genevieve had softened, seeing the potential for a legitimate heir. But behind the scenes, a more sinister plot was unfolding. Its architect was Penelope Ashford, a woman from Nathaniel's social circle, a svelte, cunning brunette with an old money pedigree that Genevieve adored. Penelope and Nathaniel had been close for years, and Isabel had always sensed an unnerving connection between them. The night of the annual Hawthorne Charity Gala was the apex of the social calendar. Isabel, now heavily pregnant, felt clumsy and out of place among the lithe figures in couture. She had chosen a simple but elegant navy blue maternity gown, hoping to remain inconspicuous. That hope was shattered midway through the evening. Penelope Ashford, looking venomously beautiful in a backless scarlet dress, approached Genevieve with a feigned look of distress. She handed the older woman a file folder. Isabel watched from across the room, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. She saw Genevieve's face pale, then flush with a terrifying cold rage. Nathaniel was summoned. He read the documents, his face a mask of practiced betrayal. Then all three of them converged on Isabel. The champagne flute that Genevieve threw wasn't aimed at Isabel, but at the floor before her, a symbolic shattering of her place in their world. The orchestra stuttered into silence. Hundreds of pairs of eyes, a jury of the city's elite, turned to watch the execution. You dare Genevieve's voice, though low, carried across the cavernous ballroom. You stand in my house, wearing the Hawthorne name, while carrying another man's child. Isabel felt the blood drain from her face. What? No, that's not true. Nathaniel, tell them. She looked at her husband, her anchor, the father of her child. He stared back, his expression one of cold, calculated sorrow. I can't believe you, Isabel, he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. I gave you everything, and you repay me with this ultimate betrayal. He gestured to the folder in his mother's hand. We have proof. Paternity tests. Don't deny it. Paternity tests, I've never taken one. This is insane, Isabel pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. The faces in the crowd swam before her, a mixture of shock, pity, and cruel satisfaction. They were vultures, and she was the carrion. Penelope stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on Nathaniel's arm. We also have photos, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Of you and your associate. They were lies, all of it. A carefully constructed cage of deceit designed to trap and destroy her. She realized it then, looking from Nathaniel's resolute face to Penelope's triumphant smirk. This was a coup. Get this creature out of my house, Genevieve commanded the security guards, and make sure she takes nothing but the clothes on her back. Isabel begged her pleas, swallowed by the shocked murmurs of the guests. She looked for a single friendly face, a flicker of support, but found none. She was an outsider, and the tribe had turned on her. The guards, large men in black suits, took her arms. They were firm, but not violent, their impassivity somehow more dehumanizing. They escorted her through the gawking crowd, up the grand staircase to her room, where a single suitcase had already been packed with a few of her old pre-marriage belongings. As she was marched back down and toward the massive front doors, Nathaniel delivered the final devastating blow. My lawyers will be in touch regarding the divorce, he said, not even making eye contact. Consider our marriage, and any claim you thought you had null and void. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing in the cold September night. The gravel of the long, winding driveway bit into her thin shoes. The sounds of the party, the music and laughter started up again, a brutal testament to how quickly she had been erased. She stood there, a 7-month pregnant woman, with a single suitcase cast out from the mansion on the hill, with nothing but the chilling night air and the weight of a catastrophic betrayal. Her life was over, or so they thought. The first few hours were a blur of shock and cold. Isabel walked her suitcase, bumping awkwardly against her legs, down the long private road that led away from the Hawthorne estate. Each step was a painful reminder of how far she had fallen. The grand gates at the bottom of the drive seemed to mock her, a final barrier between the life she had lost and the terrifying uncertainty that lay ahead. She managed to call a taxi, the driver giving her a long, pitying look. Where could she go? She couldn't face her parents, not yet. The shame was a physical weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She thought of the pride in their eyes at her wedding, and couldn't bear the thought of replacing it with the pain of her failure. She checked into a drab, anonymous motel off the interstate, paying in cash from the small emergency fund she kept in her purse. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and disinfectant. The threadbare bedspread was a universe away from the Egyptian cotton sheets she had slept on just last night. She sank onto the lumpy mattress, and finally the dam of her composure broke. Sobs racked her body. Deep, agonizing waves of grief for her marriage, for the man she thought she loved, and for the innocent child in her womb, who was now caught in this nightmare. The next few days bled into a week of crushing despair. She barely ate her world, shrinking to the four walls of the grimy motel room. The news was unavoidable. Her face was splashed across gossip websites and tabloids. Hawthorne heir in paternity scandal. Society schemer exposed. Billionaire's wife banished. The stories fed by anonymous sources close to the family painted her as a manipulative, cheating gold digger. They had not just thrown her out. They were systematically destroying her reputation, ensuring she had no recourse, no one to turn to. Her bank accounts were frozen. The credit cards Nathaniel had so generously given her were declined. The small amount of cash she had was dwindling alarmably fast. Fear, cold and sharp, began to cut through the fog of her grief. She wasn't just heartbroken. She was destitute, and she was responsible for another life. One bleak afternoon, as she was rationing the last of her snacks, her hand brushed against something hard in the bottom of her purse. It was a small, ornate silver locket, one of the few things she owned that predated Nathaniel. It had belonged to her grandmother, Rose. Her parents had given it to her on her 18th birthday. She rarely opened it, but now, desperate for a connection to a time when she was loved unconditionally, she fumbled with the clasp. Inside, on one side, was a tiny, faded picture of her grandparents on their wedding day, Arthur and Rose Kensington. They looked so young, so full of hope. On the other side, tucked behind the picture, was something she had forgotten was even there. It wasn't another photo. It was a minuscule, antique-looking key, no bigger than her pinky nail, with an intricately designed head. Beneath it, folded into a tiny square, was a slip of aged paper. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. Written in her grandmother's elegant cursive was not a sentimental note, but an address, Suite 7B, the Aldridge Building, 455 Grand Avenue, downtown. She'd seen it before years ago, when her grandmother passed, but had dismissed it as an old memento. Now it felt like something more. A lifeline. A whisper from the past. What was it? An old apartment. A storage unit. The Aldridge Building was a pre-war monolith of granite and brass downtown, a place that spoke of old money and quiet discretion. It was a world away from the flashy modernity of the Hawthorne Empire. With her last $40, Isabel took a bus, her pregnant belly drawing curious stares. She felt like a ghost, haunting a city that had already forgotten her. Standing in the opulent, hushed lobby, she felt a fresh wave of intimidation. The concierge, a stern man with a perfectly trimmed moustache, looked her up and down with disapproval. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone suggesting he very much doubted it. "I'm here to see about Suite 7B, she said, her voice barely a whisper. He raised a skeptical eyebrow. "There is no resident in 7B. It's a private office. Do you have an appointment?" "No, I have this," she said, holding out the tiny key. The concierge's expression shifted instantly. The skepticism vanished, replaced by a flicker of something else, recognition, and a sudden profound respect. He straightened his posture. "Of course, madame," he said, his voice now deferential. I will inform Mr. Chen that you have arrived. Please have a seat." Isabel was stunned by the change. Who was Mr. Chen? And what was it about this tiny key that commanded such immediate authority? She sat on a plush leather sofa, her heart hammering against her ribs. For the first time in weeks, a fragile tendril of hope, terrifying in its novelty, began to unfurl within her. She didn't know what lay behind the door of Suite 7B, but she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that it was the end of one chapter and the beginning of something she could never have imagined. The echo from her past was about to become a roar. The elevator that carried Isabel to the 7th floor was a relic of a bygone era, all polished mahogany and gleaming brass ascending with a smooth, silent grace. It opened directly into a small private vestibule. Before her was a single heavy oak door marked simply with a brass plate, 7B. The door was opened before she could knock by a man in his early 60s. He was of Asian descent, impeccably dressed in a tailored grey suit, with sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His demeanor was calm, professional, and radiated a quiet competence. "Mrs. Hawthorne," he said, his voice even. "I am David Chen. Please come in. We have been expecting you." The statement sent a shiver down Isabel's spine. "We have been expecting you. How?" She stepped inside, and her jaw nearly dropped. The office was not the dusty, forgotten space she might have imagined. It was a vast, modern library, lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, filled with leather-bound volumes. In the center of the room was a massive, polished mahogany desk, and behind it, a panoramic window offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline, a view to rival the one from the Hawthorne mansion. I don't understand," Isabel stammered, clutching her grandmother's locket. "My grandmother left me this key." "She did," Mr. Chen said, gesturing for her to sit in one of the plush leather chairs opposite the desk. "As did her mother before her. That key is the identifier, the proof of lineage." He moved to the desk, his movements precise and deliberate. He didn't sit, but stood beside it as if he were a regent awaiting his queen. "My full name is David Chen," he explained calmly. "I am the senior partner of this firm and the executor of the Kensington Trust. Your grandmother Rose Kensington was the last steward. Upon her passing, and per the explicit instructions of the Trust's founder, we have been waiting for the next direct female descendant to present the key." Isabel's mind was reeling. Kensington Trust. My grandfather's name was Arthur Kensington. He was a mechanic. He died before I was born. They didn't have any money. Mr. Chen gave a small, sad smile. "That is the story your grandfather wanted the world to believe to protect his family. But no, Isabel. Arthur Kensington was not a mechanic. He was a visionary, a genius in engineering and finance, and he was the co-founder, the true architect of a company you know very well." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. He and William Hawthorne Sr., Nathaniel's grandfather, started a company together in a garage in 1948. It was called Ethelred Holdings. Arthur was the brains. William was the salesman. Arthur developed revolutionary patents in energy and logistics. William secured the financing and the contracts. They were supposed to be equal partners. He slid a thick, leather-bound ledger across the desk. Isabel opened it. Inside was a beautifully preserved partnership agreement, dated 1948. The signatures were clear as day: William A. Hawthorne and Arthur M. Kensington. In the late 1950s, Mr. Chen continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. As the company was on the verge of explosive growth, William Hawthorne betrayed his partner. He used legal trickery and manufactured a crisis to dilute Arthur's shares eventually, forcing him out with a pittance and a non-disclosure agreement that legally barred him from ever speaking of his involvement. William then renamed the public-facing arm of the company Hawthorne Industries, and took all the credit building a dynasty on your grandfather's stolen genius. Isabel stared at the document, her heart pounding. The story her parents told was that her grandfather had a failed business and lost everything dying a broken-hearted man. The truth was infinitely more cruel. But Arthur was smarter than William gave him credit for. Mr. Chen said, a note of pride in his voice. Before he was forced out, he did something brilliant. He converted his original undilutable 51% share of the parent company Ethelred Holdings into a blind trust. The Kensington Trust. It was structured so that Hawthorne Industries could operate, pay its dividends, and grow but ultimate control. The majority ownership remained dormant, waiting. The trust was legally untouchable, set to activate only under specific circumstances, with its assets compounding silently year after year, decade after decade. He walked over to the window, looking out at the city. Hawthorne Industries, the company your husband is so proud of, is merely the largest and most visible asset within Ethelred Holdings. The trust your grandfather created owns the parent company. It has been quietly managed by my father and now by me, growing in the shadows. Its portfolio has diversified into technology, real estate, and global equities. The dividends from Hawthorne Industries were just one small part of its income stream. Isabel felt her breath catch. What are you saying? David Chen turned to face her, his expression serious and profound. I am saying, Isabel, that the Hawthorne family fortune is but a fraction of the assets you now control. They have been living in a palace believing they were kings when in reality they were tenants, and their landlady has finally arrived. He opened a drawer and produced a thick portfolio of documents. The Kensington Trust is now yours to command. Your net worth is not measured in millions, but in billions. To be precise, as of the market's close yesterday, the trust's valuation is approximately $28.7 billion. The number was so vast, so incomprehensible, it didn't even sound real. $28.7 billion. Just weeks ago, she had been crying over a dwindling $40 fund in a roach-infested motel. The Hawthornes have no idea, Mr. Chen stated. They believe their wealth is their own. They do not know that the true ownership of their entire legacy rests with the granddaughter of the man they betrayed. Isabel looked down at her hands, then at her swollen belly. This wasn't just about money. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming a stolen legacy for her grandfather, for her grandmother who had lived a simple life guarding this incredible secret, and for her child whose own legacy they had tried to deny and destroy. A fire she didn't know she possessed began to burn in her chest, consuming the grief and fear. It was replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Nathaniel, she said, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. His mother. They tried to ruin me. They cast me out with nothing. Yes, Mr. Chen affirmed. They made a grave miscalculation. Can they be brought to justice? She asked, her voice steady now, firm. David Chen allowed himself a genuine, confident smile. Isabel, he said, you don't bring them to justice. You are the justice. You own the company, you own the mansion they live in. You own the very air they breathe. The only question is, what do you want to do about it? The days that followed the revelation in David Chen's office were a whirlwind of managed chaos. Isabel moved from the dingy motel into a magnificent penthouse suite that Mr. Chen kept for the trust, a discreet, unlisted residence with bulletproof windows and a dedicated staff who addressed her as Ms. Kensington. The shift was jarring. One moment she was counting loose change for a vending machine soda. The next, a private chef was asking for her dietary preferences. But this was no time for indulgence. Isabel understood with chilling clarity that wealth without knowledge was just a vulnerability waiting to be exploited. The Hawthorns had wielded their power like a weapon because they understood its mechanisms. If she was to face them, she couldn't be the naive art curator they had discarded. She had to become their equal, and then their superior. Her transformation began not in a salon or a designer boutique, but in a conference room that became her classroom. David Chen, who she quickly realized was less a lawyer and more a consigliere, assembled a team of elite tutors. There was a former Wall Street analyst named Robert, who taught her corporate finance, breaking down balance sheets and market capitalization until she could read them like a novel. A formidable woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, a professor of corporate law, drilled her on hostile takeovers, proxy battles, and fiduciary duties. A silver-haired ex-diplomat, Julian, coached her on negotiation, public speaking, and the art of projecting unshakable authority. Her days were grueling. She woke at dawn, her baby bump a constant reminder of what she was fighting for. She spent hours absorbing information her mind once occupied with art history and color theory, now grappling with leveraged buyouts and derivatives. She discovered a sharp, analytical intellect she never knew she had. The fear and sorrow that had crippled her were being channeled into a laser-like focus. The Hawthorns' greatest weakness is their arrogance, David explained one evening as they reviewed the financials of Hawthorne Industries. They've become complacent. Nathaniel's father was a competent CEO, but Nathaniel is a showman. He's over-leveraged the company on a series of vanity projects. They are stretched thin, vulnerable. They're currently trying to broker a massive merger with a Swiss energy conglomerate, a deal they believe will solve all their problems. And can we stop it? Isabel asked, her pen hovering over a column of figures showing Hawthorne's rising debt. We can do more than stop it, Isabel, David said with a glint in his eye. We can buy it. Parallel to her intellectual boot camp was a physical and aesthetic transformation. It wasn't about vanity, it was about armor. A stylist was brought in, not to make her trendy, but to make her formidable. The soft floral dresses were replaced with impeccably tailored suits in shades of charcoal navy and ivory. Her long, girlish hair was cut into a chic, powerful bob that framed her face, highlighting the new steel in her eyes. She learned to walk in heels that announced her arrival with a confident click, not a hesitant shuffle. When she looked in the mirror, she no longer saw the scared, heartbroken wife. She saw Miss Kensington, the chairwoman of Ethelred Holdings. She was becoming the woman her grandfather, in his wildest dreams of justice, might have hoped she would be. The most difficult part of her transformation was emotional. At night, alone in the vast, silent penthouse, the pain of Nathaniel's betrayal would sometimes resurface. She would place a hand on her belly, feeling the kick of her child, and the ache would be sharp and real. He was the father of this baby, a man she had loved with all her heart. How could he have been so cruel? She confided this to David one evening. He listened patiently before responding. What you are feeling is grief for a man who never existed, Isabel. You loved a character, a role Nathaniel was playing. The real man is the one who left his pregnant wife on a curb to appease his mother and advance his social standing. Do not mourn the illusion. Focus on the reality. He is not your husband. He is a liability in a company you own. His words were harsh but necessary. They were the final pieces of steel she needed to forge her resolve. She had to compartmentalize the pain to see Nathaniel not as her former lover, but as an adversary, an obstacle. Weeks turned into 2 months. Isabel was no longer just learning. She was commanding. She sat at the head of the conference table, questioning Robert on market fluctuations and directing David's legal team on strategy. She had an innate feel for it, a strategic mind that her grandfather would have recognized. The plan was taking shape. Under the anonymous banner of a newly created subsidiary of the Kensington Trust, they began quietly acquiring Hawthorne Industries' debt from various banks. They became the company's largest and most invisible creditor. Simultaneously using their immense influence, they began raising legal and regulatory hurdles for the Swiss merger, causing delays and costing the Hawthornes millions. Nathaniel and Genevieve were growing desperate. Isabel read the internal reports intercepted by David's team. They were furious, paranoid, blaming market volatility and corporate espionage from their rivals. They had no idea the storm bearing down on them was being directed from a penthouse just a few miles away by the woman they had written off as a worthless footnote in their history. The final piece of preparation was the most personal. One afternoon, David presented her with a file. It was the proof Nathaniel had used against her, the faked paternity test and the digitally altered photos. "We have traced the payments," David said grimly. Nathaniel paid a private investigator and a lab technician a significant sum 2 weeks before the gala. Penelope Ashford made the introductions. It was all premeditated. Looking at the cold, hard evidence of their conspiracy, Isabel felt no tears, only ice. "Good," she said, her voice even. "Make a dozen certified copies. I want one for every member of the Hawthorne Board of Directors." The time for hiding in the shadows was nearly over. The Queen was forged. Now it was time to claim her kingdom. The winter that followed was one of mounting anxiety for the Hawthorne family. From the outside, their lives continued with the usual pomp and circumstance. Genevieve chaired charity boards. Penelope was photographed at every exclusive event on Nathaniel's arm, and Nathaniel himself projected an air of unassailable confidence in the financial press. But within the marble halls of the mansion and the glass-walled offices of Hawthorne Industries, a quiet panic was setting in. Their savior, the merger with Alpine Energy Consortium of Switzerland, was inexplicably falling apart. Regulatory bodies that had previously been compliant were suddenly raising arcane objections. Key stakeholders in Alpine were getting cold feet, citing market instability and undisclosed risks in Hawthorne's portfolio. Every move Nathaniel made was countered by an invisible, formidable opponent. It was like playing chess against a ghost. "It has to be the Vanderbilts," Nathaniel roared in a board meeting, slamming his fist on the table. "They've wanted our shipping lanes for years. This has their corporate raiding tactics written all over it." Genevieve, sitting in on the meeting as the family's largest shareholder, looked pale. "Are you sure you can handle this, Nathaniel? Our family's legacy is at stake." "Of course I can handle it, Mother." He snapped, his usual smooth charm fraying at the edges. The pressure was getting to him, and his relationship with Penelope was showing the strain. Their public appearances were flawless, but in private their conversations were laced with accusation and fear. What they didn't know was that Isabel from her command center in the Kensington Trust penthouse was directing the entire campaign. She had become a master strategist. "Robert, I see Hawthorne is trying to secure a bridge loan from Sterling National Bank," she'd say, during their morning briefings, her eyes scanning a dozen screens of real-time data. "Have our subsidiary Crestview Capital contact Sterling's board. Make them a better offer. Buy the end debt portfolio they hold on Hawthorne. I want to own every single one of their obligations. Anya, the Swiss regulators are meeting on Tuesday, she'd instruct her legal head. I want you to file an amicus brief on behalf of our environmental NGO in Brussels, raise concerns about Hawthorne's carbon footprint on their South American operations. Let's give the Swiss something to worry about. It was a silent, bloodless siege. They weren't attacking Hawthorne Industries head-on. They were buying the ground out from under it, cutting off its supply lines and poisoning its wells. To the world, it looked like the company was simply imploding under the weight of Nathaniel's poor decisions. One of their most effective moves was entirely social. David Chen, through his vast network, discovered that Genevieve Hawthorne was fiercely proud of her family's blue-blooded history, which she traced back to the Mayflower. David hired a team of discreet genealogists and historians who, with the vast resources of the trust, dug into the Hawthorne family tree. What they found was gold. William Hawthorne Sr. hadn't come from old money at all. His father was a bookkeeper from a poor immigrant family who had changed his name and fabricated his entire history upon arriving in America. The entire Hawthorne legacy, the foundation of Genevieve's insufferable pride, was a lie. David had the discovery meticulously documented, authenticated, and prepared for release at the perfect moment. While this corporate war was raging, Isabel was also preparing for the birth of her child. She found a quiet strength in the life growing inside her. This was no longer just about revenge. It was about building a better, more honest world for her son. She would often sit in the nursery, a beautifully appointed room overlooking the city, and speak to her unborn baby. They tried to say you weren't worthy of their name. She would whisper, her hand on her belly. One day, you'll understand that it was their name that was never worthy of you. The pressure on Nathaniel was becoming immense. Creditors were calling. The board was getting restless. The stock price of Hawthorne Industries was plummeting. In his desperation, he made a fatal mistake. To raise capital quickly, he decided to put the legendary Hawthorne Mansion and its surrounding estate up as collateral for a massive high-interest loan from a private equity firm in the Cayman Islands. The moment the paperwork was filed, an alert pinged on Isabel's desk. David Chen walked into the room. He's done it, he said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. He's pawned the crown jewels. Isabel looked at the alert, then at the live feed of the Hawthorne stock price ticking downward. Instruct the firm in the Caymans, which we, of course, own through 3 shell corporations, to approve the loan immediately, and add a default clause with a 24-hour reclamation window. Let him think he's found a lifeline. A slow, determined smile touched her lips. He's just handed me the keys to his house, the house he threw me out of. The irony is almost too perfect. The trap was set. The Hawthornes were cornered financially and psychologically, and they still had no idea who was hunting them. Isabel had dismantled their defenses piece by piece. All that was left was to choose the time and place for the final checkmate. And she knew just the occasion to do it. 6 months after Isabel had been cast out, the Hawthorne family was preparing for one last, desperate gamble. Their finances were in ruins, the Swiss merger was dead, and creditors were circling like sharks. To project an image of strength and stability, and to woo new investors, Genevieve decided they would host the annual Hawthorne Charity Gala as planned. It would be smaller, more exclusive, but the message was clear: the Hawthornes were unbowed. The irony was thick enough to choke on. They were hosting a lavish party in a house they no longer truly owned, funded by a loan from the very woman they had destroyed. In her penthouse, Isabel was also preparing. Her son Arthur Kensington Jr. had been born 2 months prior, a beautiful, healthy baby with her eyes and a serene disposition. Motherhood had settled a profound calm upon her, extinguishing the last embers of vindictive rage and replacing them with a cold, clear sense of purpose. This wasn't for her anymore. It was for him, for his future, for the legacy of the grandfather he was named after. For the gala, her stylist had chosen a gown that was the antithesis of the simple maternity dress she'd worn last year. It was a magnificent creation of deep emerald silk that clung to her now slender frame. It was elegant, commanding, and utterly unforgettable. Diamonds, real ones from the Kensington vault that dwarfed Genevieve's collection, glittered at her throat and ears. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a woman she barely recognized, a queen ready for her coronation. David Chen arrived to escort her. "Are you ready?" he asked, his expression one of paternal pride. "I am," she said, her voice betraying no hint of nerves. The Hawthorns stood in the grand foyer of their mansion, greeting guests with strained smiles. Genevieve looked older, the stress having etched new lines around her eyes. Nathaniel's charm was a brittle veneer over a core of raw panic. Penelope Ashford clung to his arm, her eyes darting around the room as if seeking validation that her position was secure. The party was in full swing when the massive front doors opened once more. A hush fell over the room as every head turned. Isabel stood framed in the doorway. It was as if time had stopped. The murmuring ceased. A glass slipped from a server's tray and crashed to the floor, the sound echoing the one from 6 months ago. But this time, the woman at the center of it all was not a scared, pregnant girl in a simple dress. She was a vision of power and wealth, her gaze sweeping over the assembled crowd with an unnerving, regal calm. Nathaniel's face went white, as if he'd seen a ghost. Genevieve's jaw tightened, her expression a mixture of fury and disbelief. Penelope's perfectly made-up face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Isabel walked into the room, David Chen a half step behind her. The crowd parted for her, as if she were royalty. Her eyes met Nathaniel's across the ballroom. She gave him a small, chilling smile and began to walk toward him, her heels clicking a steady, resolute rhythm on the marble floor. "Nathaniel, darling," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the sudden silence. "And Genevieve, a lovely party. I do hope you can afford it." Genevieve was the first to recover her voice. "What is the meaning of this? How dare you show your face here, security?" "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Isabel said calmly, stopping just before the trio. She nodded to David, who stepped forward and handed a document to Genevieve. "This is the deed to this house, Mrs. Hawthorne," David explained politely. "It was signed over as collateral for a loan, which I'm afraid your son defaulted on. This morning at 9:00 a.m., the new owner is a private trust. My client, Ms. Isabel Kensington, is the sole trustee." Genevieve stared at the paper, then at Isabel, her eyes wide with horror. "Kensington?" "Yes," Isabel said, enjoying the moment of dawning comprehension on their faces. "You see, you thought you married a girl with no background. As it turns out, my background is the one that has been funding yours for the last 70 years. She turned her attention to the stunned guests who were listening with rapt attention. "Many of you were here 6 months ago when I was thrown out of this house, accused of the most vile things. You watched and did nothing, so allow me to set the record straight." David Chen handed another set of documents to a bewildered journalist from the city's top newspaper who happened to be near the front. "In there," Isabel announced, her voice ringing with authority, You will find proof that the paternity test used against me was a fraud paid for by Nathaniel Hawthorne. You will find the unaltered photographs and the sworn confession of the private investigator he hired. You will find that he and his mistress Penelope Ashford conspired to disinherit my unborn child and remove me. Penelope let out a small gasp and tried to shrink away, but Nathaniel held her arm in a vice grip. His empire, his life, was publicly dissolving before his very eyes. "But that," Isabel continued, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level, "is just a family drama. The real story is about business." She turned her icy gaze back to Nathaniel. "Your merger with Alpine failed because I made it fail. Your lines of credit dried up because I bought your debt. Your stock is worthless because my company, Ethelred Holdings, founded by my grandfather Arthur Kensington and stolen by yours, has initiated a majority shareholder buyout. As of this morning, Hawthorne Industries is no more. It has been reabsorbed by its parent company. By my company." She let the bombshells hang in the air, each one landing with devastating force. The guests were speechless, their faces a canvas of shock and awe. This was a story they would tell for generations. "So you see," Isabel said, her voice softening, but losing none of its power, "I'm not crashing your party. I'm simply attending a function in my own home with my employees." She gestured vaguely at the Hawthorns. "Though I must say your performance has been unsatisfactory. You're all fired." The fallout from Isabel's declaration was immediate and catastrophic for the Hawthorns. It was a nuclear bomb detonated in the heart of their world, and the shockwave leveled everything they had ever known. Before Isabel had even finished speaking, the journalist was on his phone, dictating the story of the century to his editor. Smartphones held aloft by stunned guests were already streaming the confrontation live. The name Isabel Kensington was rocketing across social media, instantly becoming the #1 trending topic worldwide. In the ballroom, chaos erupted. Genevieve Hawthorne, the unbreakable iron matriarch, finally broke. A strangled gasp escaped her lips. Her face turned an ashen grey, and she crumpled to the floor in a dead faint amidst the rustle of her expensive silk gown. Paramedics already on standby, as per David Chen's meticulous planning, entered discreetly to attend to her. Nathaniel was frozen, his mind unable to process the sheer scale of his ruin. He stared at Isabel, his face a mask of disbelief. "No," he whispered. "It's not possible. You were nothing." "I was your wife," Isabel corrected him, her voice devoid of emotion. "The mother of your son, and you threw us away for her," she said, nodding towards Penelope. "Was it worth it?" That question shattered the spell. Nathaniel's terror curdled into rage. He turned on Penelope, his grip on her arm tightening painfully. This was your idea. You pushed me to do this." "Me!" Penelope shrieked, trying to pull away. "You were the one who was terrified of your mother. You never had a spine." Their ugly, desperate recriminations provided a tawdry spectacle for the departing guests who were now fleeing the scene as if the mansion itself were cursed. They wanted no association with the fallen dynasty. The Hawthorne name, once a symbol of power, had become toxic in a matter of minutes. Isabel simply watched them for a moment, a queen observing the petty squabbles of disgraced courtiers. Then, with a quiet word to her own security team, she had them separated. "Escort Ms. Ashford off my property," she commanded. Penelope, weeping and hysterical, was unceremoniously led out, her scarlet dress, a smear of color vanishing into the night. Finally, Isabel was alone with Nathaniel. He looked utterly broken, a hollowed-out version of the confident man she had married. "Izzy, please," he begged, his voice cracking. He took a step towards her, his hands outstretched. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. I was a fool. I loved you. I still love you." Isabel held up a hand, stopping him in his tracks. Don't you dare use that word. The man I loved would never have done what you did. You didn't love me, Nathaniel. You loved the idea of me, the simple girl who made you feel powerful. When that became inconvenient, you tried to crush me. You tried to disown your own son. She gestured for David, who produced one final document. "These are divorce papers. Your lawyers, who are now technically on my payroll, drew them up. You will cede all rights to any assets, not that you have any left. You will also relinquish all parental rights to Arthur. He will be a Kensington, not a Hawthorne. He will be raised with honor and integrity, two things you know nothing about." Nathaniel sank to his knees, the fight gone. From him, "What will I do? What will I have? You have the name you were so proud of," Isabel said, her voice like chipping ice. "And tomorrow the world will know the truth about that name as well. They will know about the theft from my grandfather. They will know about the fabricated ancestry." She leaned in slightly. "You will have exactly what you left me with 6 months ago. Nothing. The only difference is I had our son to fight for. You only have yourself to blame." She turned and walked away without a backward glance, leaving him kneeling in the middle of his parents' no, her ballroom. The days that followed were a relentless tide of humiliation for the Hawthorne family. The story was everywhere, on every news channel, in every paper. The carefully documented proof of their lies, the fake paternity test, the stolen company, the fraudulent family tree, was laid bare for public consumption. The Hawthorne name became a punchline, a byword for arrogance and deceit. The board of Hawthorne Industries, presented with the irrefutable evidence of Ethelred's majority ownership, capitulated immediately. They resigned en masse. David Chen was installed as the interim CEO, tasked with dismantling the old structure and integrating its viable assets into the Kensington portfolio. Genevieve recovered from her collapse to find herself in a world she no longer controlled. She was a guest in her own home, her social standing obliterated. Her friends no longer took her calls. The charities she once ruled over politely asked her to step down from their boards. Her entire identity, built on a foundation of lies, had been demolished. Nathaniel Hawthorne Jr., the golden boy of the city, became a pariah. He was hounded by paparazzi, ridiculed in the press, and ostracized from the circles he once dominated. With no money and no influence, he was less than nobody. He was a disgrace. The reversal of fortune was absolute, brutal, and entirely of his own making. 3 months passed. The winter chill gave way to the first hints of a gentle spring. The world, for the most part, had moved on to the next scandal, the next headline. But for the individuals at the heart of the story, the changes were permanent. Isabel Kensington had not, as many expected, embarked on a lavish, celebratory lifestyle. Instead, she had poured her energy into her work and her son. She had officially taken her seat as the chairwoman of Ethelred Holdings, and she proved to be a natural leader. Guided by David Chen, she began a new chapter for the company, one focused on ethical investments, sustainable energy, and generous philanthropic endeavors under the newly established Arthur Kensington Foundation. She was transforming a legacy of theft into a force for good. The Hawthorne mansion had been transformed as well. The opulent, stuffy decor favoured by Genevieve was gone, replaced by a lighter, more modern aesthetic. The dark, imposing portraits of Hawthorne ancestors were replaced with pieces from Isabel's own curated art collection. It was no longer a monument to a false dynasty. It was becoming a home. One bright morning, Isabel sat in the sun-drenched study, the same room where Nathaniel had once planned her ruin, gently rocking baby Arthur in her arms. David Chen entered with a folder. "Good morning, Isabel. The final arrangements are made," he said, softly. Isabel had decided the fate of the Hawthornes. It was her last piece of business with the past. She hadn't spoken to them since the night of the gala, communicating only through David. She had refused all of Nathaniel's desperate attempts to contact her. An hour later, Nathaniel and a frail-looking Genevieve were shown into the study. They were dressed in modest, off-the-rack clothing, a stark contrast to their former splendor. They looked diminished, lost in the grandeur of the room they once commanded. Isabel did not stand. She looked at them coolly, her baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. "I have made my decision," she said, her voice calm and final. "Revenge is a shallow and exhausting pursuit. My focus is on the future, on my son." She gestured to the folder David held. "I will not see you left destitute on the streets. That is your cruelty, not mine. The Kensington Foundation has established a small anonymous trust for you. It will provide a modest stipend for your living expenses and a small apartment in a quiet, respectable neighborhood far from here. It is enough to live a simple, dignified life, but not enough to ever trouble my world again. The condition is that you sign these papers legally, changing your name, and agreeing to never contact me or my son again." Genevieve looked up. Her eyes filled with a weary hatred. "You've taken everything." "You had nothing to take," Isabel replied evenly. "It was all built on a lie. I am simply restoring the truth. This is more mercy than you showed me when you threw me out into the night, pregnant and penniless." Nathaniel looked at the sleeping baby in Isabel's arms, a flicker of something regret-loss, longing crossing his face. Can I just see him?" "No." Isabel said the word sharp and absolute. She adjusted the blanket around Arthur protectively. "You gave up that right? He will know he has a father, but he will also know that his true legacy comes from the man he is named for, a man of brilliance and integrity. He will never be burdened by the Hawthorne name." Defeated, they signed the papers. They were no longer Hawthornes. They were just two people erased from the annals of the elite, their story a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. As they left the mansion for the last time, walking down the long gravel driveway Isabel had once walked alone, they didn't look back. Isabel stood at the vast window of the study, looking out over the magnificent gardens. The sun was rising higher, casting a warm glow over the estate. She held her son close, his small body, a warm, reassuring weight against her. The ghosts of the past had been exorcised. The pain, though not forgotten, no longer had power over her. It had been forged into strength, into wisdom, into a legacy of her own making. She had walked through fire and emerged not burned, but purified. Here in the house from which she had been banished, she was finally truly home at the dawn of a new and better day. Isabel's journey shows us that the deepest betrayals can sometimes lead to the most profound discoveries, not just of forgotten fortunes, but of our own inner strength. She was stripped of everything she thought she had, only to find everything she was truly meant to be. Her story isn't just about revenge. It's a powerful testament to resilience, the enduring power of truth, and a mother's incredible will to build a better world for her child. She didn't just reclaim a mansion. She rebuilt a legacy on the foundations of honesty and justice. What would you have done in her position? Would you have sought vengeance, or would you have chosen, as she did, to build something new and positive from the ashes of the past? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of triumph and resilience moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs a reminder that it's always darkest before the dawn. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next unforgettable story. Thank you for watching.